Hello all. So today I'm talking about a Honda with the P0369 code, what it is and how you go about fixing it. So what is a Honda P0369 code? Well, it's a camshaft position sensor B circuit intermittent bank 1. And what does this mean? Well, the onboard computer uses the camshaft position sensor to know the location of it as it spins, and this is used for timing. So the onboard computer is seeing an error inside the circuit, so it'd have to be troubleshooted as to why. And sensor B will be the second sensor. Usually there's one sensor, but some Hondas have two sensors. So a sensor B would mean that there's two sensors. You have to Google your particular engine and year of Honda, since there can be some differences. But basically you have a sensor A and a sensor B. And while many Hondas will have one sensor, this one will have an exhaust and an intake sensor. So you have to locate these. As you can see inside this image, here's sensor A, and then can't see so well, but there's a sensor B right there. And the camshaft position sensor is just a small little device. It bolts in, usually has just one bolt, sometimes two, and then a wiring harness going to it. The hardest part of swapping one of these out is going to be if there's anything in the way. Sometimes on Hondas there could be things in the way. Sometimes they could be under valve covers, or you have to move a part. But sometimes they're in the open, and if they are in the open, they're really easy to swap out. They'll just have 1-2 bolts and a wiring harness. And while code P0369 will point to a bad sensor, it can also be in the wiring. Bad wiring could cause the same symptoms as a bad sensor. So it should also be checked out. Some people would just go ahead and swap out the sensor and then they'll go to the wiring. But the wiring is not too difficult to troubleshoot, especially if you have a known good sensor around, like you've already gone down and bought a sensor. You can test it out really quickly and easily as long as you have a meter. And the older Hondas had 2 wires for the camshaft position sensor, and newer ones could even have up to 4, so it could vary a little bit. But by far the most common is 3-wire. You always want to get a schematic for your particular Honda, but 3-wire is very common. And the basic thing going on here is you have a ground, you have a reference voltage, which is usually going back to the battery. So it could be like 12 volts or it could be 8 volts, but it'll be going back to the battery and it'll be always on. So if you put your meter from like middle to one of the outer pins, you should have a steady voltage of like 12 volts or 8 volts. The 3rd wire will be going back to the onboard computer, and this changes depending if the sensor has metal in front of it. So if there's metal directly in front of it, it'll go like 5 volts. If there's no metal in front of it, it'll be 0 volts. So often what a mechanic will do is they'll take a known good sensor, they'll take the plug off, they'll plug it in, they'll come in on the back of the wiring harness, they'll go the middle ground to the return wire to the onboard computer, and they'll put a piece of metal in front of the sensor, and if it changes, then they know the whole circuit's good. And that's just a real quick common technique. There's different ones. You could check for an open or a short or different things. You could check and see if you got voltage coming in. That's one thing to mention, is that quite often this whole circuit is on a fuse. So if you're not getting no voltage from the middle pin to one of the outer pins, this constant like 12 volts or 8 volts, then that fuse could have blown. And it's usually located inside the engine compartment. There'll usually be a fuse box in there. Sometimes it could be underneath the dash, but it's usually up inside the engine compartment. Inside of there, it'll be something like SNS or sensor, something along these lines. And so that's something to keep in mind. Be sure to check for a blown fuse, especially if you're not getting voltage to this plug. And so if you checked out the wiring and you checked out and there's no blown fuse and it all looks good, then the sensor is likely bad. You have to swap it out. They're low-cost parts. They're not really super expensive. Usually you get one for like $20, $30. I'll jump over on Amazon, give you an idea. You know, it'll vary depending on the engine, obviously, but they're not like super high-cost parts or nothing. And so what do you do if you have a Honda with the P0369 code? Well, first thing to do, Google where the sensors are located on your engine. You're going to have to find them. That's the first thing to do. Check the wiring. Be sure the wiring looks all good. Check for a blown fuse, especially if you're not getting voltage to the wiring harness. You could do other tests on this circuit too if you wanted to be sure the wiring's good before ordering a sensor, or you could just get a sensor. And if the wiring all looks good and there's no blown fuse, replace the sensor, and that'll usually solve the problem. And so that's basically it. I just wanted to do a real quick video on how you go about fixing a Honda with the P0369 code. If you have anything to add, please comment down below. If you have any questions, ask me and I'll try to answer them. If this video helps you, please click like, please click subscribe, and have a good day.